Today we are painting one of the most fearsome and deadly chapters you can come across in the realms of Warhammer 40,000, and that is the Death Guard. Infamous for spreading pestilence and rot, these gifts of Nurgle are despicable and vile. But to them, they are some of the most beautiful things that their Papa Nurgle could ever give them. Which means today we are delving into the more grimdark side of Warhammer and paint this Death Guard in what is really one of the easiest schemes you can paint, and in my opinion looks fantastic for how easy it is. And one of the best things about these bad boys is that they're now available for everyone to get, as before they were in these Lucky Dip gacha boxes, which the resale value was insane. But let's start the painting process, and for this we are using English Uniform by Vallejo. I'll put the Games Workshop equivalent in the description, but just so you fully know, they might not fully match up. And to start, we are going to be using a technique known as dry brushing, which basically means we're going to get this big makeup brush, dab it in some paint, and get rid of that paint by either just spreading it all around my paint pot, or spreading it onto a nice bit of dry cloth. And for this original dry brush, I'm going to let some of the footage play, as I'm doing this with pretty much no real technique, going left, right, down and up, in a straight pattern, in an attempt to get the whole model coated, leaving a lot of that black in the background. Now this is when you know how much paint you'll have on your brush, and in this circumstance, less is more. Because we don't want to fully base coat this miniature, we want that dry brushed effect. So it's always good to start with less, and maybe add some more if it's not getting the effect you like. Now we can move on to our second paint of the day, Desert Yellow by Vallejo. As we are now increasing the intensity of that green yellow all over the armour of the Marine. And for this, I have even less paint on my brush, and I'm being very precise with how I am now dry brushing, adding with fast downstrokes to the armour, aiming just to catch the bottom third of every armour panel. And we can now start to see how this is beautifully highlighting the Marine. And it's time for our third and final paint for the armour, and that is Ogryn Camo, which is going to be our final highlight, and I'm going to be dry brushing very sparingly, just hitting the edges of the armour, and that'll give us those amazing edge highlights all over the model. I also really quickly dry brushed the little Nurglings, as at this point I really didn't know what colour I wanted them to be, so it's better just to do it now instead of having to redo it later on. So with the armour out of the way, it's time to paint the dreaded trim all over the pauldrons and armour, and for this we're using Decayed Metal, probably my favourite metallic paint ever made. Now this is actually going to be one of the hardest steps on the miniature for today, as it will require some brush control not to get any of this metallic paint on the green, but I trust you. So here's my gift to you. Some black metal. This is one of the best silver paints ever made, and we are going to use it over all of the chains on the Mini, as well as these weird leg things, and of course his bolter gun. Now this is where hope falls, as the Black Legion sabotaged my paint lid by not fully closing it down before shaking it. Oh, this is the third time this has happened this year. So after picking myself up and of course cleaning my hands, I grabbed some Black Legion contrast paint and painted all of his inside armour lining, as well as started to paint his bolt gun black. And this black contrast paint is actually pretty good. It's like being able to paint black on anything without having to worry about having to thin the paint. And speaking of thin paint, I grabbed some Uthwayan, I have no idea how to pronounce that, grey, as it's time to start painting all of the bones white. I started with his knee pad, as this is one of Games Workshop's air paints, it's already thinned, so you can pretty much just slap it right on, but a little bit of thinning does go a long way. And the reason why we're painting all the bones in this light grey is for my new secret paint scheme. And for a skull shoulder pad, I wiped a lot of the white paint off and kind of slightly dry brushed this paint all over the skulls so that you can see some of the black inside the skull eyes and sockets. So one day I was messing around with some paints, and I think I discovered what is probably the best bone paint I've ever found, and it's a mixture of 2 drops of Skeleton Horde contrast paint and 3 drops of the new Known Oil. And you can see I started with 2 drops, but it kinda came out a bit too yellowy for my liking, so I came back and added another drop of Known Oil. Now, I must say I am using this on a wet palette, so if you use a dry palette, maybe add a drop or 2 of water into the mix. And I must say, not to toot my horn, this adds so much beautiful agedness to the skeletons with this nice yellowiness and the darkness from the Known Oil onto the skeleton skulls. I also quickly added this over all of the silver metallics. Since it looked pretty good for the bone, surely it will look good on all the metals. So on the miniature there are these weird bugs, or they're cables, I couldn't quite tell, but I grabbed some voluptuous pink and painted his stomach tongue, as well as all the little bugs in this lovely pink contrast. So this is the part of the model where I think I screwed everything up, and this is all down to his face. I wanted to paint it in a horrific pale skin tone like my previous Inquisitor, but it looked terrible and it really didn't work. So in the meantime I left it to dwell, and I added tiny dots on the skulls for some highlights, which I did remove a lot of them later on. So this is me now trying to remedy that skin tone by adding some of the skull bone juice to it. It really didn't work, so I was like, maybe I can add some voluptuous pink and add some cool warmth under the skin tones. It also didn't work. So after much deliberating, I thought, let's just carry on with the model and grab some elven gold, as it's time to get that ancient relic gold effect all over the armour. For this, instead of edge highlighting, I'm going to be stipple highlighting by lifting my brush on and off all of the decayed metal, so it has these awesome random highlights over all of the metals. I also do add some tiny edge highlights, but I make sure to add it in small parts and not complete a straight line or edge to make it have that cool aged effect. And over a large surface like this one, I kind of paint in a waveform, or like a little tornado going across it. So let's finally fix this ghostly visage and repaint his skin tone. For this, I am base coating it in Night Quester's flesh for a nice warm brown. And I wanted this to look quite patchworky, to be quite horrific, like he's just found it on the floor and just plopped it back over his skeleton skull. So while the paint was still wet, I grabbed some Cadian flesh tone, which is more of a Caucasian skin colour, and painted it in patches, focusing on general highlights like his forehead and ears. And since it was still wet, it blended nicely all together. I then added a tiny bit of that light grey from earlier into the mix for the highest of highlights. And to my horror, or rather amazement, it actually looked alright. And off screen I quickly painted all of the two Nurglings in the same way as I did for this whole mini. And it's time for the final effects, which we are using blood for the blood god to add all of the blood effects. The areas I primarily focused on was his eyes and mouth, which came out really gross, as well as the Nurglings' mouths, as they're just little hungry boys. And for the final effect, I just added a quick wash of Agrax Earthshade over his bolter gun for some quick contrast. And there you have it. For what is a really easy paint job, he actually looks amazing for the amount of time I put into him. Let me know what you think. I'm going to be more committed to a schedule in the future, so hopefully you'll have a video from me every Sunday, and a diorama hopefully fortnightly. And until then, I'll see ya in the next episode. Bye!